Kyle Miner is the author of 2 collections of short stories, In the Devil's Territory and most recently, Praying Drunk. He won the Iowa Review and Tara M. Kroger Prizes for short fiction. He's appeared in numerous literary journals, including Tin House, Esquire, The Southern Review, and elsewhere. His work has appeared in the Best American Mystery Stories in 2008 and Best American Non-Required Reading in 2013. He is also a columnist at Salon and, rumor has it, The Nation. Jason Diamond said, we're going to make the prediction that 2014 will be the year when literary folk won't be able to stop talking about Kyle Miner's masterfully written collection of stories. He's a writer you absolutely must read. Join me in welcoming Kyle Miner.
Thank you for coming. I was going to read a different story, but I had such a good time with the class earlier today. I thought I'd take a risk and try something a little different. I spent about parts of about 5 summers in Haiti. It was in a rural village south of Port-au-Prince in Ouest Province, and one of the most striking things about that experience was observing Americans coming in and out, and often bringing good things and then leaving behind bad things in their wake, and sometimes leaving behind some good things too. And I was thinking particularly of a lot of short-term aid workers that came in and out of town. At the same time, I was reading a lot in the book of Genesis, those old stories which are so often so dark, actually, and which yield up the true things that they do, sort of out of that kind of unyielding look at the things that they look at. I was thinking about the story of Abraham and Isaac, and the shockingness of the moment in that story when God seems to be asking Abraham to offer up his son for a sacrifice. And I was thinking about the stories of the time of the invasion of Canaan and things like that. And I was thinking about them in a place where the world was similar in some ways to the world of Genesis, because all the stories were happening out in the public square instead of behind closed doors and places of comfort. So I wrote this story sort of in the spirit of that, of those stories I was reading in Genesis, and they're from the point of view of an American aid worker who sort of has come unhinged in his life in an unhealthy way, and now has to reckon with things that he hasn't expected, most especially his relationship with his translator or fixer, the Haitian man that he enters into a relationship of economic transaction with, and it turns out to be a thing that he, by the end of the story, doesn't entirely know what to do with. So this story is called 7 Stories About Sebastian of Couleville. 1. The first day I met Sebastian. The children at the orphanage said Sebastian is a liar. The man at the tree place said Sebastian is the best translator in Ouest Province, no French in his English. The missionaries said Sebastian is bad news. When he was a child, he was always breaking things. You should see the 2 ladies who raised him. They're both hunched over. He wore them out. The Canadian dentist recommended Sebastian. He said one day he was up in the mountains doing field dentistry, and this husband and wife came in with vampire teeth, triangles that came to points. They said their teeth hurt, and Sebastian said, "Don't fix the vampire teeth, just do the fillings." But the dentist didn't listen. He restored the man's teeth and the woman's teeth to happy squares. He showed them in the mirror. He thought they'd be so happy. But the woman yelled and the man cried. Sebastian listened and did his translating. Sebastian said, "Get out the file. They want the vampire teeth back. There's a thing they do." The man pulled back the neck of his shirt to his shoulder. There were hundreds of little scars, some of them fresh. I paid Sebastian $70 a day. The other translators got $50, but he said he had a thing for 7s. He said he had 7 older brothers. When he was 7 days old, 7 women begged his father not to give him away to the 2 lady missionaries. They said 7 curses will befall him. The first curse was the curse of English, Sebastian said. We were walking the village barrette, taking the census of the rabbits and the chickens. No Creole allowed, no French, the women said, only English. So Sebastian spoke in English, read in English, wrote in English, watched movies in English, gave tours of the missionary compound to visiting Americans and Danes in English. They said, "We're your mothers now," he said. "Children speak the language of their mothers." The day he turned 17, the 2 missionary ladies drove him up the mountain to his father's house. They said, "Now you're grown, we've done all we can." Sebastian said, "Aren't you my mothers?" They cried and drove away. His father came out of the house and cried and embraced him and spoke to him in a language he couldn't understand. The second curse was the curse of Creole, Sebastian said. It took me 7 years to speak it well enough to pass for a Haitian. Up the hill was the Hungin's house. His wooden roof was painted purple beneath a field of orange stars. I wanted to visit him and convince him to sell it to me to take to Florida. Sebastian said, "If the Hungin came to my village, we would have to kill him." "Why?" I said. "Because," Sebastian said, "he does not have the love of Christ in his heart." Later, I asked the elders of Sebastian's village if they would kill the Hungin. They laughed. "Sebastian is a liar," they said. "The Hungin is our friend. He goes to the church in Barrette sometimes on Sundays when they need a trumpet player. The Hungin is a very good trumpet player." In the village Barrette, Sebastian told me the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th curses. It was getting dark, and we were walking up out of the village. I asked him what was the 7th curse. "You see these people, all my neighbors? I have to live among them. You and me, we're not like them." He headed up the hill a ways, and I followed him across the mountain to his home. From every house we passed, people called their greetings. 2, before the earthquake, because there's 7 stories, so you'll know how quickly we can get out of here today. This was before the earthquake reduced the Hotel Montana to rubble. We were sitting at the bar drinking Dominican beers, Jean-Pierre, Sebastian, and me. The next morning we had to drive to Jacmel to count some rabbits and chickens. Sebastian had a little cocaine, and I gave him a little money, and he gave me the cocaine, and I put it in my pocket for the morning. We were playing a game called Who's More Heroic Than the Americans. It was a joke of a game. The first round, everyone said, "Everyone who's not an American." The second round, you had to tell another true story, but this one had to be specific. "I knew a Catholic priest in Cité Soleil," Jean-Pierre said. "He was Nigerian. The people were so mean to him. This went on for years. They stole things from his house. Once he was beaten in the street and no one came to his aid. Still, he lived 7 years in a shanty house, even though he could have lived well. He could have lived anywhere. One day, a little retarded boy was crossing an open sewer on a lashed-together bridge made of 2 halves of one tree. The sewer was 5 feet deep with water and every kind of human waste. The sewer was the color of disease. This little boy couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Halfway across the bridge, some older boys came and shook both sides just to be mean. The little boy fell in. He was flailing around. There was a big crowd. People were watching him go down, but nobody wanted to jump in. Around the time the boy went over, the Nigerian priest came walking by. He didn't even hesitate. He didn't take off his clothes or his watch or take out his wallet or anything. He just jumped in, head first, into the sewer water. He went under and came back up with that teeth. That brown sludge was in his mouth, in his teeth, in his eyes. "I can beat that," Sebastian said. "I knew a man who was taking a blowtorch to the side of a shipping container somebody was using for a store in the village Marigot. The store owner caught him red-handed at midnight. His bag was filled up with Biscuit, dry goods, Tampico juices, Coca-Colas. The store owner called for his cousins, and his cousins called for their cousins. Soon all the men of the village surrounded this man in the shipping container. They tied him up, and in the morning they dragged him out to the middle of the road. They brought out all the children to see. The store owner said, 'See what happens when you steal.' While the man was still alive, they hacked off his fingers and toes one by one. They sealed the wounds with a hot iron. Then they hacked off his feet and hands. Then they hacked off his arms at the elbows and his legs at the knees. Then they poured gasoline over his head and set him on fire and watched him dance around while he died." "The store owner was a hero," Jean-Pierre said, "for protecting his family business." "No," Sebastian said, "the thief was a hero for risking his life to get food for his family." They looked at me. I shielded my part of the table with my arm. I poured some of the powder on the table, made a line, and snorted. I said, I wish I had some to share. 3. After the earthquake. We went down to the mausoleum where Sebastian's dead were buried. The earth had buckled in waves, and one of the waves split the center of the concrete, and where it had split, the fresh corpses had fallen out of their graves and mingled on the ground with the bones of the longer dead, and some carrion animals were pulling at a dead woman's face. The smell is in my nostrils still. At the graveside, I told Sebastian I couldn't take this anymore, this gruesome scene, this horror movie. Sebastian lifted the bodies from the ground, one by one, and held them for a while. Auntie Marie, he said, Auntie Titi, Auntie Solange. 4. The Pig and the Pony. We reached a vista. All of Port-au-Prince stretched out beyond us, the sun reflecting from the middle roofs of the Bidonville shanties like 100,000 daytime stars. An American Airlines jet took off from the airport. Sebastian said any child with a shoulder-fired rocket launcher could stand on any rooftop in La Saline and blow any airplane out of the sky. Why hadn't it happened yet? A donkey draped with yellow saddlebags came up the road from the distance. A thin man in a yellow shirt led the donkey up the hill. He waved as he got closer. His shirt and the saddlebag said DHL in red letters. We said bonsoir and como y and bien. Bien. What do you have? Sebastian said. Letters, the DHL courier said. Where's your motorcycle? Sebastian said. The DHL courier said the gas tank had rusted out, so he had replaced it with a gallon milk jug, but someone had dropped a match into the milk jug while he was making a delivery at the cement store. After the DHL courier left, 6 men came up the hill carrying a casket. They were dressed in fine linen suits, and white specks from the dirt in the road were soiling their shoes, which were newly shined. We made room so they could pass us, and as they passed, we briefly joined in their funeral song. We watched them disappear behind a bend where the road followed the curve of the mountain, and when they were gone, I asked Sebastian who was in the casket. That is the wife of one of the elders of the village, Jean-Baptiste, he said. She fell in love with a bourgeois man in the city. Every day she took the tap-tap to see him. He gave her so much money. When the elder found out, he fed her feet to his pony. Later, I visited the village Jean-Baptiste and played soccer with some of the men who lived there. After the game, the women made a feast of rice and stewed tomatoes and a sauce of leeks and carrots. For me, they killed their fattest rabbit, and they would not take any money for it. While we were eating, I asked about the elder who fed his wife's feet to the pony. A man stood up and said, "Come, let me show you." We walked down the orange path, past his sister's house, his brother's house, the houses of his 2 friends and his one sworn enemy. A bone-thin pony was tied up in the front of his own house. He petted the pony and said, "The lies they are telling about you." Then we went to the backyard where he kept his 2 pigs, and he pointed to the fatter one. "It was this fellow who ate the feet," he said, "not the pony." We stared at the pig for a long time. I imagined the woman's feet in its mouth. And then the man laughed bitterly. "Do you think this is a village where we feed the parts of people to animals?" He said it to shame me. When I told Sebastian, he said, "Don't believe it. I don't trust that pony." 5. The 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th curses. Once late at night, we were trying to sleep in the reclined seats of a borrowed Jeep in the middle of the treeless forest, on our way to cross the Dominican border. We both kept machetes under our seats, and I had a gun. Somewhere near enough to hear, but not near enough to see, a lot of people were singing and beating drums. I kept the keys in the ignition. Sometime before morning, Sebastian said, "Tell me about your mother." "She was a good woman," I said, "but for 20 years she refused to talk to her sister." "Her sister slept with her husband," Sebastian said. "No," I said, "it was a misunderstanding. Her sister forgot to pick me up from school one afternoon, and one time she left me alone in her house for a half hour while she went to the store to buy some groceries. There was an incident with somebody saying something to somebody else about what somebody else said to some other person. I'm not sure I understand it." "After I was born, my mother ran away," Sebastian said. "No one knows where. There was some kind of craziness in her family. My father said many of them had been turned into zombies. He took me to see them near Furcy. They were chained to a plow, 4 of them, and pulling it. My father said that's voodoo, and I said, no, it's not. That's mental illness. The farmer had a whip, and he wasn't driving them with it. He didn't need the whip. Their spirits were broken already. They were machines with broken brains." He reached under his seat for his water bottle and took a sip. "Why are people so bad to each other?" he said. "There was this crazy woman. She always came to town with this mongrel dog. She had only one friend, and he was a crazy person too. A line of drool always hung from his mouth. He had gums instead of teeth. Sometimes he stole some food for her dog. I never saw her eat. She was always looking for food for the dog." Sometimes when I think of him now, it's this moment. He's staring out the window in the direction of the mountains of Massif de la Selle, thinking about his mother. Sometimes she slept on the steps of the mission school. When she did, we stepped over her. Someone might poke her with his foot to wake her. Someone probably kicked her sometime, but I never saw anyone do it. One morning, the dog was gone. She was walking the street looking for the dog. All day she was looking. The next morning, she lay on the steps of the mission school. I stepped over her. We all did. We all stepped over her. Nobody poked or kicked her. We let her sleep. We felt sorry for her because of the dog. She was still lying there at the end of the school day when they opened the doors and let us free. She didn't move the whole day, and then she didn't move the whole night. One of the teachers came along and covered her body with a black sheet. Nobody wanted to take her body. Nobody wanted her to live forever with their own dead. Nobody wanted her bones with their bones. Nobody claimed her body until the next morning. It was the crazy man who fed her dog. He lifted her body, sheet and all. He was talking to her. He had her under the armpits, and he started spinning with her. He was dancing with her. They were turning and turning. He was making a noise like an animal soon to the slaughter. People were yelling, "Put her down, put her down." The boys picked up rocks and threw rocks at him. He had to flee. He tried to carry her away with him, but she was too heavy. The rocks were still coming. His face was bloody from them, and his shirt was torn. Finally, he dropped her in the grass by the side of the road. She lay there for 3 days, and then a Dutch man paid to have her buried in another village. He sent 2 men to collect her body. For a while, I didn't think about her much, but after I saw her relatives chained to the plow, I thought, could that crazy woman have been my mother? 6. The tumor. The kids at the orphanage said, "Why do you ride around with Sebastian?" The missionaries said, "Watch out. He wants things from you. He will steal things from you. Watch your guns. Watch your jewelry." The man at the tree place told me about a cash for charcoal scam that ended in nobody getting any charcoal. The man at the art kiosk across the street from the mission told me about a middleman scheme. The man who built the wooden A-frame houses that were meant as temporary housing, but which the people who bought or received them meant to last 100 years, told me about a strike and extortion scheme which yielded nothing. "I have 100 bodyguards," the man said, although he had only 2. A farmer in Artiste told me of a scam where Sebastian tried to sell electricity he was stealing by tying barbed wire to the new power lines the president was running up the mountainsides. "Does he think I don't have barbed wire?" the farmer said. "Everyone has barbed wire." Almost every day, Sebastian asked me for more money. He said his nephew needed money to give the school for photocopies. He said his niece needed money for needle and thread. He said the church needed money for sound equipment. He said his father needed money for a saw and a lathe and a level so he could start a new business as a carpenter. He said he knew a man whose father had a tumor the size of a small grapefruit on his prostate. He said he needed money to take out the tumor. "Let me see this man," I said. "Take me to see this man." We walked down into Sebastian's village. "Don't be alarmed," Sebastian said, "when you see their eyes. All the members of this family had a degenerative eye disease. They all went blind by age 25. My friend is 23, Sebastian said. You can see it already. The disease is eating his eyes." There were 8 small children, 2 teenage girls, Sebastian's friend and his father and mother, both of whom were in their 70s. Sebastian's friend was a very late child. "A miracle child," I said. "A shame and a burden," Sebastian said. The teenage girls and the children were the sons and daughters of sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters who had long since fled for the city. These were the unwanted children, or the too many children, or the children taken early by blindness. Sebastian's friend was working for tips at the Hotel Kinam to bring in money and tending the garden in the mornings. When he was gone, people stole from the garden. There was no one in the family able to do anything about it. We greeted Sebastian's friend. "My friend," he said, "my good friend. He will come see my father." He led us through a maze of banana trees, past the 100-year-old stone house, to the unfinished concrete house at the back of the property. It had holes for windows and a hole where the roof would go. The old man sat shaking in a chair at the center of the room. Piles of construction sand filled the four corners. The old man leaned on his cane and shook. He waved us near him and spoke. He had the breath of brown death. After he said half a sentence, he paused to catch his breath, and Sebastian translated. "I saw you in a dream," he said. "Bondier sent you from America. Your journey took you over the sea. You are estranged from your mother. You are wearing glasses and you have beautiful shoes." Most of these things were true. "Bondier said this man will come," he said. "You will show him your wound. He will lay hands on your wound and your wound will be healed." He pushed on his cane. With some effort, he sat upright in his chair. With his shaking hand, he handed the cane to his son. With great effort, he reached both hands to his pants button and his zipper. He said, "I will show you." He unbuttoned his pants and he unfastened his zipper. With both hands, as if presenting a bouquet of flowers, he held himself out to us. What he showed was mostly tumor. Most of his hair had fallen away. Only a slight smear remained, and it was slick with a yellowish-white discharge from a suppurating wound that was on the tumor but not of the tumor. "Bondier said," the old man said again, "this man will come. You will show him your wound. He will lay hands on your wound, and your wound will be healed." Everyone was looking at me. Sebastian with his good eyes, the man's son with his cataracting, failing eyes, the old man with his blind eyes. Even the tumor seemed like a giant dying eye. The man's son was nodding as if to say, "Go ahead." Sebastian was watching, as if to see what kind of man I was after all our time together. I held out my hands. I cupped them as if I were preparing to draw water from the river. I put them on either side of the tumor. The skin swollen by the tumor was hot, and the skin covering him was as cold as a slab at the morgue. "You must pray," the son said. "Our Father who art in heaven," I said. It wasn't a prayer to the sky. It was a prayer to the people in the room. If there was any belief to borrow, it belonged all to them. And then I couldn't remember the rest of the words to the prayer, even though it was the most famous prayer in the world. In my mind, it had become conflated with a less famous poem by an American who had once been my teacher at the university. "Our Father, who art in heaven, I am drunk, again, red wine, for which I offer thanks. I ought to start with praise, but praise comes hard to me. I stutter." I had not memorized the whole poem, but I did remember the ending, the beautiful ending. The drunk, praying, thinks of himself as an old-time cartoon character, a poor jerk who wanders out on the air and then looks down. Beyond his feet, he sees eternity, and suddenly his shoes no longer work on nothingness, and down he goes. The drunk prays, "As I fall past, remember me." It seemed as fitting a prayer as the one I had forgotten. I cobbled together bits and pieces of both and drew on the language of special pleading I remembered from all those years at the Cherry Road Baptist Church. I used the words suppurating and grapefruit and hot and cold and shrivel and shrink. And when I was done, nothing happened. Everyone was as blind or cataracted or tumored or lying or despicable as we all of us had been before we prayed. And my hands were wet with white pus. I told the old man I was sorry. Nothing happened. He had not been healed. I must not be the man Bondier had sent from beyond the sea. He said, "We must wait. Bondier's time is not our time." Outside, I asked Sebastian, "How much is the surgery?" Sebastian said, "All surgeries are $300. I said, "I have $400 in my pocket. I'm going to give all of it to him." Sebastian said, "If you give him $400 for his surgery, they will use it to buy sand in Portland, or they will use it to buy a window, or they will use it to buy corrugated aluminum for a roof. The old man will die soon no matter what you do." "What can I do?" I said. "You can give the money to me," Sebastian said. "I will take it to pay the doctor, and I will pay the tap-tap to take him to the doctor." I looked at him and I knew. He would take the money and put it in his pocket and I would never see him again. Or I would see him again the next time he wanted some money. "No," I said, "no." I put the money back in my pocket and vowed to return after we did the count in Mirabelais in 3 weeks. Pick up the old man myself, take him to the hospital myself, pay for the surgery myself. In later years, a woman told me, "Who do you think you are to play God? Who do you think you are, the Savior of the world?" I said, I only wanted to save this one man for a little while. I knew he was going to die soon. 3 weeks passed. We returned to the village. Another casket, a cheap one, was marching up the street. So many of the pallbearers were blind. Don't worry, Sebastian said. You took his tumor in your hands. But I didn't cut it out, I said. You should have given me the money, he said. 7. This is the last one. At the marsh. A few days later, we went to the market to buy fruits and vegetables. The whole market had fallen down in the earthquake, but now an Irishman had rebuilt the clock tower and the minarets, restored the masonry, reinforced the iron columns. The Irishman said the new walls were earthquake-proof, and the roof was covered with solar panels. These were the days when it was hard to walk into a building and not be afraid the walls and the roof might fall on you and crush you. You looked for a space beside a sturdy piece of furniture and traced an invisible line at a 45-degree angle, which you dive beneath for shelter at the first shake. Every so often, continuing to this day, another building would fall in an aftershock. All over the country, we saw 3-story buildings pancaked to 1 story, and lo, these years later, the bodies still inside. They didn't even stink anymore. Almost for certain, the bacteria and the worms and the rodents had picked them to bones. But it wasn't like the early days. People were moving. Children in uniforms walked to school in the mornings. The tap-taps were full of men carrying their work tools and canvas bags. In the city, the cell phone vendors walked the streets in their red smocks, carrying their red phones, selling recharge cards and soda and water. Vendors walked through the traffic jams, carrying on their heads cardboard boxes full of plastic sugar and caffeine concoctions, and vacuum-sealed plastic bags of water. In the market, I bought 2 bottles of atomic energy drink, one for me and one for Sebastian. And he bought me a styrofoam container full of griot and fried plantains and pickles. I bought him a pizza from a vendor, billing herself as the Walt Disney Pizza Company. Famous mice and dogs and ducks decorated the sign behind her. We took our food outside and crouched in the shade of the nearest wall. While we were eating, Sebastian said, "When you leave, will you come back?" I stopped eating for a moment. An uncharacteristic sincerity was in his eyes. I didn't trust it. "You are my good friend," he said. But that's what everyone said, everyone who wanted something. I could see myself in a few weeks sitting on my couch in Florida watching football. The job was over. There was no reason for me to stay. "What will you do?" I said, "after I leave?" He patted his wallet where he kept some of his walking around money, and he patted his shoe where he kept the rest. "I have met some important people," he said. He pointed at every 10 degrees of the sky around us. "I'm going to buy a new suit. The future is big." Already he had gathered 10 of the best English speakers in Couleuville. He planned to drill them 6 days a week in the morning when the mind is still fresh. He planned to lease them by the day to journalists and tourists and aid organizations of every stripe with special rates for weekly or monthly hires. He would take 20% as his fee. No longer would he be the wage worker. Now he would be the collector of the real money, the wage giver, the big boss. "When you get home," Sebastian said, "you will not remember me." Within 6 months, he would be dead. The rally at the palace, the fires, the burning tires, the gunshots, 2 to the head. That day at the market, he said, "It's going to be the most beautiful suit. It's going to be linen. It's going to be chalk-striped, double-breasted. It's going to have a notched lapel. I'm going to get it tailored." Thank you. Well, we have a few minutes. Does anyone have any questions? It's probably hard to follow a story that difficult with questions. Probably just want to go eat some good food or something. But we do have a few minutes, so yes.
Well, here's a kind of technical question about something that I noticed in the story. To use a metaphor for it, it's a backstitch. That is just before the end of the story, and I think just before the end of the 6th segment,
Yeah.
Here's where I first started to pick up on it. You know Charles Baxter's story, Snow.
Mhm.
That's a really notable example of that metaphor, just before the end of the story.
Well, the technique that you're asking about it is sometimes called prolepsis or flash forward. And I think the most interesting example of it in all of literature is in a novel by Edward P. Jones called The Known World. Has anybody read that book? It's a really beautiful book, and it does a very strange thing with time, which is all the time you'll be sort of in the antebellum South and following a character, and then suddenly the narrator will step onto the stage and say, 75 years later, his 15 grandchildren did this thing on this piece of land, you know? And in the case of that book, and in the case of a lot of his stories where he uses that technique, the effect is to talk about how stories are interconnected, you know, how a thing that happens in the past has tremendous ramifications on the future, and how, in fact, that's a part of the story as well. It's a nod toward community. In this story, I think that the reason that I used it is because the story is told by an observer narrator who's looking back on a thing that he has yet to make sense of. And in fact, if the story ended with the death or with the tragic event, its meaning would be distorted because the death was only a portion of what the story was about. What the story really was about was the living that preceded the death and the relationship between the two people while they were still alive or before the thing had happened that happened. And I think that's the reason that I wanted to do that in that story, to underscore that. And I also think that's a thing that we do, right? We tell a story about a person that we know that's gone. Well, in terms of time, the story, at least the temporal version of this, the physical version of the story, that ends with the death of the person. But that's not what their life was about. It was about their life, you know. And for the teller of the tale, it was about the relationship. And that's I think the reason for the formal choice. It's a good question, though. Anyone else? Yes.
I wanted to ask you about aboutness, in a sense. I just read your interview with The Believer, and I kind of want to follow up on that. How often do your stories get away from their initial intellectual purpose in the writing of them? How fast? And is that okay to relinquish?
Well, the good ones always get away from you really fast when you're writing them because you think you're writing about one thing and then the story teaches you that actually it's a different thing. I mean, maybe there's a preoccupation that precedes the making of the story, and as you push out into it, you realize that you didn't even understand the preoccupation in the way that the story is beginning to reveal. Or maybe you understand that you wanted to tell a story, but you've invented a narrator that actually has a different way of understanding the world than you do, and you have to fall into that thing. So it's a scary thing to take that approach to writing a story because you don't know what you're going to find, and it might not be the thing that you wanted to find in the first place. Yes.
Maybe in that same vein, and I don't know if this is fair, but what, if anything, do you want your readers to do after they read a story like that?
I don't know. I think of these stories and the reading of them as an opportunity for an exercise in empathy, you know? I mean, what literature has done for me is give me repeatedly an experience that I can never have in life, which is to enter into a consciousness not my own and live there for a while and see what that's like. And that's a different thing in kind from the didactic impulse to instruct, which is also a thing that stories can do. I mean, there's a lot of writers I like that really seem to want to do that, like Isaac Bashevis Singer, all these great Yiddish writers, and even writers like C.S. Lewis, you know. So that's a different kind of story than the one that I mean to write. I think that I think that there's a thing that precedes that, a step that often gets skipped sometimes when that's the end, which is the end of just entering into the other, whatever form that takes, and that's what I hope to offer in the story. So it may be that the speaker actually comes to a conclusion or a way of understanding a thing that I don't like or agree with, but that's not the point. The point is to offer up that consciousness in its fullness the best I can. Yes.
How do you inhabit the consciousness of your narrator when you're writing?
Well, that's the hardest thing, isn't it? The question was how do you inhabit the consciousness of your narrator? I don't. This is actually a question that kind of came up in the class earlier today, and I don't know that there's any one answer to it. I mean, certainly we know when things do or don't ring true when we read them after they're finished, but for me, the first step in inhabiting a consciousness as fully as I could on the page was to do it for a character who was very much like me the first time, and to sort of wear those grooves into the road, you know, to see here's all of the things that attach to that consciousness, and to start to realize if I want to offer up the fullness of this narrator who's like me, I also have to give the reader a sense of what my interior life is like, and all the things that I know, and all my preoccupations and my prejudices, and the things about me that aren't good, and everything, you know. And that's the thing. Usually when I'm constructing a narrator, I start with a couple things. I like to start with a knowledge of something that they want so badly that the story's wrapped itself around or need. And also I want to know what's been withheld, and to start to set time and motion around that. I want this thing so badly, it's been withheld, and now I'm going to reveal so much about myself as I chase whatever I chase in the aftermath of that trouble, that collision of things outside my control. Perhaps we have time for one more? Yeah, maybe time for one more question. And if not, it's okay. All right, well, thank you for letting me come. I've had a very good time at BYU, and really, I'm on a long book tour, and this has been one of the best experiences. And my hosts have been so warm, and the people that I've talked to have been so smart and engaged and interested. And that's the best thing you could hope for when you come to visit a place. So thank you very much.